He ruled Wall Street with an iron grip, but even all his power couldn't stop three small boys from breaking into the heart he'd spent years guarding. One snowy evening, in a quiet park, a billionaire crossed paths with the family he never realized he was missing. And from that moment on, everything changed. This isn't a story about wealth. It's about love, loss, and the kind of redemption that money can't buy. Before we begin, drop a comment below and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to greet you. Now let's begin. Each tap of Miles Whitaker's Italian leather shoes across the marble floor echoed like a reminder of what his life lacked. The grand chandelier hanging above sparkled flawlessly, its light dancing across gleaming surfaces, but offering no warmth. At 42, Miles had become the very definition of success, a billionaire by his own making, with investments spread over 5 continents, a portfolio strong enough to shake Wall Street, and a mansion that stood like a monument to his ambition. And yet, despite all of it, the house felt like a tomb. Cancel the charity gala, Miles muttered into his phone, not waiting for his assistant's reply. Double the donation if they complain. He ended the call without saying goodbye. He always did. Stopping at the towering windows that reached from floor to ceiling, he stared out at the glittering skyline of Manhattan. It was a view most people would kill to have. But tonight, all he saw staring back was his own reflection. A sharply cut navy suit hugged his lean frame. His jawline, sculpted and precise, was shadowed with 5 o'clock stubble. He only shaved these days when the media demanded it. But it was his eyes that gave him away. Steel gray and once unflinching, now dulled by years of detachment. They looked tired, like they'd forgotten what it meant to feel. A soft click of nails against marble broke his trance. Winston, his golden retriever, padded quietly up beside him. The dog was the only living thing Miles allowed past his walls. Both the ones made of stone and the ones built from sorrow. "Just you and me tonight, boy," he said quietly, absent-mindedly stroking Winston's head. The dog leaned into the son touch with silent loyalty, asking for nothing. Behind them stretched the 15,000 square feet of Whitaker Manor, filled with priceless art, custom furnishings, and European design. Everything screamed wealth. But there were no family portraits, no echo of laughter, no past worth cherishing. Miles hadn't invited anyone over in years. Staff came and went like shadows. Business partners never made it past the home office. No woman had stayed beyond a weekend. Not since the day he'd stopped pretending he could love. Tonight, though, something unsettled him. Restlessness, loneliness, or maybe just the cold realization that he had more money than most countries, but couldn't remember the last time someone said his name without wanting something in return. Grabbing Winston's leash, he stepped out into the biting November wind. It sliced through his tailored wool coat as he followed the winding trail through Oakbrook Park. At 42, Miles Whitaker had forged an empire through focus, control, and ruthless precision. Yet as the wind stung his skin and fallen leaves crunched beneath his shoes, something unexpected stirred inside him, a twinge of restlessness he couldn't shake. Winston trotted ahead, tail wagging, nose twitching at the breeze. This evening walk was the only habit Miles allowed outside his business life. Every night at 9, regardless of weather, he walked Winston through the city's oldest park. It helped him pretend, if only for a moment, that he was still human. But tonight felt different. Instead of turning right at the fountain as usual, his feet drifted left, toward the older part of the park, where the shadows deepened and lamplight grew scarce. Through the dimness, he spotted a familiar shape, a rusted old swing set, its paint peeling in patches. He hadn't been here in over 30 years. This used to be hers. He murmured under his breath, his voice nearly swallowed by the wind. His mother had loved this park. She brought him here every Sunday until leukemia stole her away. He was only 8. Miles never returned after that. The ghosts were too many, The pain. Too sharp. Winston suddenly stopped. His ears perked, his nose aimed toward the old bench, under a flickering street lamp. "Winston," Miles said sharply, expecting him to obey. But the dog ignored him, moving forward with quiet determination. Annoyed, Miles followed. As he drew closer, he narrowed his eyes, heart pounding for reasons he couldn't explain. There on the bench were 3 small figures, huddled beneath what looked like a torn blanket. Miles froze, his breath catching in the cold air. "Hey!" he called out, louder than he intended. "This isn't a hotel." The figures flinched. One boy sat up quickly. Under the pale glow of a distant street lamp, Miles could just make out 3 young boys. They couldn't have been older than 6. Identical. Tousled brown hair, wide eyes filled with fear, his words caught in his throat. "We're sorry, sir," the boy in the center said, his voice polite but trembling. "We weren't trying to cause trouble." Something shifted in Miles, a strange pull deep in his chest, long buried and unfamiliar. He looked at the boys, thin, shaking, respectful, and for the first time in years, the man who could silence boardrooms with a stare was completely speechless. He kept staring, stunned by how calm the boy seemed. "Where are your parents?" he asked finally, still gruff, though now more confused than angry. "Do you realize it's almost midnight?" The 2 boys on either side stirred. One sniffled and wiped his nose on a tattered sleeve. The smallest clutched a worn-out backpack, tightly to his chest. "They're not here," the middle boy said again, this time more softly. "Not here?" Miles repeated, frowning. "Then who's responsible for you?" There was a pause. Then, in a quiet voice full of grief, the boy on the right spoke. "Mom's in heaven." Miles felt a knot twist in his chest. "She's been gone 2 weeks, 3 days, and 5 hours. The third boy added, staring at the ground like the numbers were keeping him from falling apart. His voice quivered, but he didn't cry. For a long moment, Miles said nothing. The wind rattled the branches overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a siren wailed. But in this moment, it was just the boys, Miles and Winston, standing in silence, heavy with sorrow. "Where were you supposed to go?" Miles asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "We were staying at Mrs. Wilson's shelter," said the tallest boy, still clinging to the backpack. "I'm Noah. These are my brothers Ethan and Liam. We're triplets." Ethan, who had first spoken, suddenly curled into a harsh coughing fit, his cheeks flushed with a worrying red against the night air. "We left the shelter today." Liam spoke up quietly, his voice firm despite the cold. "They said they were going to separate us tomorrow, send us to different homes. We ran away," he admitted, lifting his chin with resolve. "We want to stay together." That's what Mom promised. It struck Miles deeper than he expected. A memory, sharp and unwelcome, rose from the back of his mind. He was only 8, standing silently in the corner of a lawyer's office, while relatives argued about who would take him. They talked like he was a burden, a problem to be solved. His mother had only been gone 2 days. His hand hovered near his phone in his coat pocket. Logic told him to call Child Protective Services. That was the proper protocol, the legal thing to do. But these boys, they weren't case files or responsibilities to pass along. They were human, small, fragile, already too familiar with loss. "When did you last eat?" Miles asked, his voice softer now. "Yesterday morning," Noah replied. Miles should have walked away. He should have made the call, washed his hands of the whole situation, and returned to his vast, empty home. But something in his chest tightened. Not pity, not guilt. Something deeper, something that felt like responsibility. Without fully understanding why, Miles Whitaker, the man the world called emotionless, found himself standing at a crossroads. And for the first time in his meticulously controlled life, his heart spoke louder than his logic. Miles remained silent as Officer Rivera approached. His calm demeanor strained slightly beneath the tension of the moment. The cold November wind whipped through the trees in Oakbrook Park, tearing through Miles's designer wool coat. Though he hardly felt it, his eyes stayed fixed on the three boys, still huddled beneath their shared, worn-out jacket on the bench. Noah sat up straight, shielding his brothers with quiet determination. Ethan, still coughing from earlier, leaned heavily on him for support. Liam's eyes flicked back and forth anxiously between the adults. These children need emergency placement, Officer Rivera explained gently after a short conversation with the boys. At this hour, they'll be taken to the closest available shelters. Unfortunately, that means they'll be separated. We don't have the resources to keep siblings together tonight. Miles's jaw clenched. Separated. That word hit him harder than he wanted to admit. His mind reeled back to the day his own world shattered. Just 8 years old, newly orphaned, and placed with people he barely knew. He remembered his aunts and uncles arguing about who had the space, who didn't. No one talked about love, only convenience. The thought of Noah, Ethan, and Liam being split up, each in a different part of the city, alone in strange rooms with no one to hold on to, it felt wrong, deeply wrong. Officer Rivera didn't seem unkind, just exhausted. Noah took a half step forward, his voice cracking but steady. "Please, sir," he said, glancing up at Miles with wide brown eyes. "Our mom always told us to stick together. She made us promise before she went to heaven," Liam added in a whisper. "She said, no matter what, never leave each other." Miles took in a slow breath, struggling against the weight pressing down on his chest. His instinct was to shove the problem back into the system. Let the officials handle it. That was what made sense. But Winston, his golden retriever, had already curled up at the boy's feet, resting his head in Ethan's lap like he'd made up his mind. The dog hadn't moved once since they arrived. He had sensed something, and now, so did Miles. He cleared his throat. "Is there no other option?" he asked. Rivera offered a helpless shrug. "Not tonight. We're full. Paperwork could take hours. They can stay at my guest house," Miles said suddenly, the words leaving his mouth before he could stop them. "Just for tonight. We'll figure things out in the morning." Rivera blinked. "Sir, that's unusually generous. I'll take full responsibility," Miles added, his voice firmer. "You have my ID. My address should already be in the system." Rivera gave a slow nod and reached for his phone. "I'll have to report it and arrange follow-ups." "Of course." For a moment, silence stretched between them. The boys exchanged cautious looks, unsure what had just happened. When Ethan stumbled from exhaustion, Miles instinctively reached out. The boy paused, scanning Miles's face for approval, then took his hand. It was small, ice-cold, and trembling. "Thank you," Ethan whispered. Miles didn't know how to reply. He simply gave a quiet nod, unsure what emotion had just filled his chest. While Officer Rivera made the necessary calls, Miles began walking the boys toward his waiting car. Behind them, the city light sparkled, just as unaware of this moment as it had always been of Miles Whitaker's life. On the outside, he still looked like the same powerful man. Sharp coat, sculpted profile, luxury car, but something had shifted inside. In the back seat, the triplets huddled together, half asleep, holding on to each other like the world might take one of them away. From the rearview mirror, Miles caught a glimpse of his own eyes. They looked different now, softer, unsure. He hardly recognized the man staring back. As the car pulled away from the park bench where he found them, Miles understood. He had made a choice tonight, and it would change everything. For them, and for him. The grand mahogany doors of Whitaker Manor swung open with a soft creak. The triplets stepped hesitantly into the massive foyer. Their tiny sneakers squeaked softly against the polished marble, leaving damp prints behind them. The room stretched endlessly. Soaring ceilings, a sweeping staircase wrapped in ornate ironwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline like a painting. A crystal chandelier twinkled overhead, casting long shadows across the marble. The place looked more like a palace than a home. Noah clutched his backpack tightly, his eyes scanning the space as if expecting someone to scold them just for existing. Ethan, pale and still coughing, leaned into him for support. Liam gazed up, in quiet awe, mouth slightly open, overwhelmed by the size of it all. The chill of the outside air was replaced by a colder feeling, the sense of being small in a place built for giants. Miles followed behind them, already questioning what he'd done. Why had he spoken so quickly to Officer Rivera? What had come over him? Maybe it was Winston curling up beside the boys like he belonged to them. Maybe it was Noah's soft plea not to be separated. Or maybe it was the way their pain echoed. His own. Pain he'd buried and ignored for decades. "Mrs. Peterson," Miles called, his voice echoing through the cavernous home. "They'll need—" He stopped mid-sentence. His housekeeper had gone home hours ago. Noah turned to him, his voice steady despite everything. "It's okay, Mr. Whitaker. We can sleep on the floor. We've done it before." Miles felt something lodge in his throat. "No," he said quietly, clearing his voice. "That won't be necessary. This house has plenty of guest rooms." He led them up the grand staircase slowly. Winston padded quietly beside them, occasionally glancing up at Miles as if wondering what came next. The hallway was lined with closed doors, each leading to rooms rarely touched. Miles opened one, a spacious guest suite, dressed in navy blue linens, a plush rug underfoot, and furnishings worth more than most families made in a year. The boys hesitated at the door, unsure if they were allowed to step inside. Ethan gently tugged at Miles's sleeve. Can we stay together?" he asked, his voice almost too soft to hear. "We always sleep in the same room." Miles froze. That wasn't what he had planned. Logically, it made sense to give them separate rooms. One boy per guest suite, their own space, their own bathrooms. But the expression in Ethan's eyes told a different story. These boys had already lost everything. Their mother, their home, their sense of safety. He couldn't take away the one thing they still had. Each other. "Of course," he said at last, after a long pause. "You can all stay in here." The relief on their faces was immediate. Miles quietly adjusted the thermostat to make the room warmer, then stepped out of the doorway, uncertain what to do next. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder for a 7 a.m. investor briefing. He turned it off without hesitation. Back downstairs, he opened the enormous refrigerator, staring blankly at its contents. Rows of protein shakes, bottled water, and gourmet condiments. Nothing even remotely suitable for children. No milk, no cereal, no juice boxes. He settled on reheating the pasta Mrs. Peterson had made the day before. It wasn't made for kids, but it was warm, and it was something. Minutes later, he placed 3 plates on his expansive dining table. The boys climbed into the oversized chairs, their feet dangling far above the ground. They ate slowly, carefully, using napkins and murmuring soft thank yous after nearly every bite, like they were dining in a stranger's mansion, which, of course, they were. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker," they said together in practiced voices. They sounded like kids who had been taught never to seem ungrateful. Miles sat across from them in silence, watching. These weren't just kids. They were survivors. For the first time in years, the silence in Miles Whitaker's mansion didn't feel empty. It felt full, with cautious chewing, quiet gratitude, an occasional cough, and something else he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. This house had never known the sound of children before. Now, It echoed faintly with the whispers of 3 sleepy voices. But Miles Whitaker, 42, cold, calculated, was not asleep. He sat on the edge of a leather armchair in the hallway just outside their room, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely as though in prayer, though he hadn't prayed in years. A man like him didn't lose sleep over feelings, not in decades. And yet, here he was, wearing a cashmere sweater and confusion, trying to make sense of what had entered his home and his heart. Winston lay silently beside him, ears tilted toward the guest room's half-open door, as if listening for any sign of distress. Inside, soft breathing broke the quiet. A sniffle, a sigh, a faint whimper from a child trying not to cry. Miles stood and wandered toward the hallway table, where one of the boys had dropped his backpack earlier. It had spilled open slightly. Something about the scattered contents, the disorder, the smallness, the vulnerability, compelled him to kneel and look. He sifted through crayons, a well-loved teddy bear with one eye missing, and a Ziploc bag containing broken cookies. Then he found it, a photograph, creased, worn, and aged by nights, clutched in tiny hands. A thin woman stood in the center, smiling despite exhaustion. Her eyes, though burdened with pain, radiated grace. Beside her were 3 identical boys, the very ones now asleep upstairs. On the back, written in faded ink, Claire, Noah, Ethan, and Liam. Last day at Whitaker Tower. Miles's throat tightened. That was his building. But what struck harder was the envelope tucked beneath the photo. Unopened, addressed in shaky handwriting, Mr. Miles Whitaker, Whitaker Tower, Executive Office. He turned it over slowly. His fingers hesitated. Then he broke the seal. The paper inside was fragile, the ink faint and trembling, written by someone clearly sick, but resolute. Dear Mr. Whitaker, you don't know me, but I've been cleaning the lobby floors in your tower for the past 3 years. My brother Michael Carter died in one of your company's factories years ago. We never got justice. Not really. I'm not writing for compensation. I just want you to know what happened and why I'm writing now. I'm dying. My sons, Noah, Ethan, and Liam, have no one left but me. I've tried every system. They want to separate my boys. Please, if you ever read this, don't let that happen. Keep them together. That's all I ask. Please, don't forget them. Sincerely, Clare Carter. Miles sat frozen. The letter trembled in his hand, like it carried breath. Clare. Michael Carter. The names echoed inside him. He remembered. A factory accident buried deep in old legal files. A case closed by his attorneys. The settlement had been minor. The consequences now felt enormous. He recalled the memo. No walk-ins. No unvetted letters. No personal appeals. He had built walls so high, not even desperation could get through. And this woman, this mother, had used her last strength to beg him, a stranger, to protect her children from the same kind of loneliness that had once shaped him. A quiet cry rose from the guest room. Soft, broken. Miles stood instinctively, stepping toward the door, but stopped short of opening it. His hand hovered just inches from the knob. Instead, he slid down, against the wall, sitting silently outside their room. The hallway light cast a soft glow over the letter in his lap. He read it again and again, each word carved deeper into him, breaking through armor he thought permanent. He wasn't a father. He didn't know how to be one. But somehow, fate had placed these boys at his feet, with their mother's dying plea wrapped around their story. He leaned his head back against the wall, the letter clutched tightly in his hand. And he listened. 3 little boys cried themselves to sleep that night, grieving, afraid, alone. And for the first time in as long as he could remember, so did he. The pale morning sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows of Whitaker Manor. But inside, Miles Whitaker felt anything but composed. At 42, he was known for thriving in pressure, handling global crises and billion-dollar deals with ease. But this wasn't business. This was different. This was personal. He paced his office, the photograph still in his grasp. Clare Carter, smiling faintly, flanked by her 3 sons. The same boys now asleep upstairs. The photo had been taken in front of Whitaker Tower, his tower. And the letter, written with failing strength, had been meant for him. But he had never seen it. He called Sarah Jenkins before he could talk himself out of it, a private investigator he occasionally used for due diligence on partners. She answered quickly, confused by his tone. "Is this business?" she asked. "No," he replied. "It's personal." Within the hour, Sarah arrived. She barely reacted to the unfamiliar sight of Miles Whitaker in jeans and a t-shirt, dark circles under his eyes. He skipped small talk. He handed her the photo, the letter, and pointed to the backpack resting on the entryway table. "I need everything you can find on Clare Carter, who she was, where she worked, what happened to her brother, and why this letter never reached me." Sarah scanned the items carefully, her sharp gaze focused. "Clare Carter," she murmured. "I've heard that name before. She used to work in my building," Miles said quietly. "Cleaning staff." "You wouldn't have known," Sarah replied gently. "People like Claire, they don't show up in executive reports." She opened her laptop and started working while Miles, hands unsteady, poured 2 mugs of black coffee. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept returning to the way Noah had looked up at him and said, "She's in heaven." To Ethan's frail, coughing, clinging tightly to a brother like he was all he had left. An hour passed in heavy silence. Then Sarah closed her laptop. "You might want to sit down." Miles didn't. He simply leaned against the wall like a man waiting to be judged. Clare Carter worked night shifts cleaning Whitaker Tower for 3 years. Sarah began. Before that, she was a full-time caregiver. Her brother, Michael Carter, died in a workplace accident 7 years ago. Miles felt his stomach drop. "That's one of mine," he said, voice barely audible. Miles froze. That wasn't what he had planned. Logically, it made sense to give them separate rooms. 1 boy per guest suite, their own space, their own bathrooms. But the expression in Ethan's eyes told a different story. These boys had already lost everything: their mother, their home, their sense of safety. He couldn't take away the one thing they still had: each other. "Of course," he said at last, after a long pause. "You can all stay in here." The relief on their faces was immediate. Miles quietly adjusted the thermostat to make the room warmer, then stepped out of the doorway, uncertain what to do next. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a reminder for a 7 a.m. investor briefing. He turned it off without hesitation. Back downstairs, he opened the enormous refrigerator, staring blankly at its contents. Rows of protein shakes, bottled water, and gourmet condiments. Nothing even remotely suitable for children. No milk. No cereal. No juice boxes. He settled on reheating the pasta Mrs. Peterson had made the day before. It wasn't made for kids, but it was warm. And it was something. Minutes later, he placed 3 plates on his expansive dining table. The boys climbed into the oversized chairs, their feet dangling far above the ground. They ate slowly, carefully, using napkins and murmuring soft thank yous after nearly every bite, like they were dining in a stranger's mansion, which, of course, they were. "Thank you, Mr. Whitaker," they said together in practiced voices. They sounded like kids who had been taught never to seem ungrateful. Miles sat across from them in silence, watching. These weren't just kids. They were survivors. For the first time in years, the silence in Miles Whitaker's mansion didn't feel empty. It felt full, with cautious chewing, quiet gratitude, an occasional cough, and something else he couldn't name but couldn't ignore. This house had never known the sound of children before. Now, it echoed faintly with the whispers of 3 sleepy voices. But Miles Whitaker, 42, cold, calculated, was not asleep. He sat on the edge of a leather armchair in the hallway just outside their room, elbows resting on his knees, hands clasped loosely as though in prayer. Though he hadn't prayed in years, a man like him didn't lose sleep over feelings. Not in decades. And yet, here he was, wearing a cashmere sweater and confusion, trying to make sense of what had entered his home and his heart. Winston lay silently beside him, ears tilted toward the guest room's half-open door, as if listening for any sign of distress. Inside, soft breathing broke the quiet. A sniffle, a sigh, a faint whimper from a child trying not to cry. Miles stood and wandered toward the hallway table, where one of the boys had dropped his backpack earlier. It had spilled open slightly. Something about the scattered contents, the disorder, the smallness, the vulnerability, compelled him to kneel and look. He sifted through crayons, a well-loved teddy bear with one eye missing, and a Ziploc bag containing broken cookies. Then he found it. A photograph, creased, worn, and aged by nights, clutched in tiny hands. A thin woman stood in the center, smiling despite exhaustion. Her eyes, though burdened with pain, radiated grace. Beside her were 3 identical boys, the very ones now asleep upstairs. On the back, written in faded ink, Claire, Noah, Ethan, and Liam, last day at Whitaker Tower. Miles's throat tightened. That was his building. But what struck harder was the envelope tucked beneath the photo, unopened, addressed in shaky handwriting. Mr. Miles Whitaker, Whitaker Tower, Executive Office. He turned it over slowly. His fingers hesitated. Then he broke the seal. The paper inside was fragile, the ink faint and trembling. Written by someone clearly sick, but resolute. Dear Mr. Whitaker, you don't know me, but I've been cleaning the lobby floors in your tower for the past 3 years. My brother Michael Carter died in one of your company's factories years ago. We never got justice. Not really. I'm not writing for compensation. I just want you to know what happened and why I'm writing now. I'm dying. My sons, Noah, Ethan, and Liam, have no one left but me. I've tried every system. They want to separate my boys. Please, if you ever read this, don't let that happen. Keep them together. That's all I ask. Please, don't forget them. Sincerely, Clare Carter. Miles sat frozen. The letter trembled in his hand like it carried breath. Claire. Michael Carter. The names echoed inside him. He remembered. A factory accident buried deep in old legal files. A case closed by his attorneys. The settlement had been minor. The consequences now felt enormous. He recalled the memo. No walk-ins. No unvetted letters. No personal appeals. He had built walls so high, not even desperation could get through. And this woman, this mother, had used her last strength to beg him, a stranger, to protect her children from the same kind of loneliness that had once shaped him. A quiet cry rose from the guest room. Soft, broken. Miles stood instinctively, stepping toward the door, but stopped short of opening it. His hand hovered just inches from the knob. Instead, he slid down, against the wall, sitting silently outside their room. The hallway light cast a soft glow over the letter in his lap. He read it again and again, each word carved deeper into him, breaking through armor he thought permanent. He wasn't a father. He didn't know how to be one. But somehow, fate had placed these boys at his feet, with their mother's dying plea wrapped around their story. He leaned his head back against the wall, the letter clutched tightly in his hand, and he listened. 3 little boys cried themselves to sleep that night, grieving, afraid, alone, and for the first time in as long as he could remember. So did he. The pale morning sunlight filtered through the frost-covered windows of Whitaker Manor. But inside, Miles Whitaker felt anything but composed. At 42, he was known for thriving in pressure, handling global crises and billion-dollar deals with ease. But this wasn't business. This was different. This was personal. He paced his office, the photograph still in his grasp, Clare Carter, smiling faintly, flanked by her 3 sons, the same boys now asleep upstairs. The photo had been taken in front of Whitaker Tower, his tower, and the letter, written with failing strength, had been meant for him. But he had never seen it. He called Sarah Jenkins before he could talk himself out of it. A private investigator he occasionally used for due diligence on partners. She answered quickly, confused by his tone. "Is this business?" she asked. "No," he replied. "It's personal." Within the hour, Sarah arrived. She barely reacted to the unfamiliar sight of Miles Whitaker in jeans and a t-shirt. Dark circles under his eyes. He skipped small talk. He handed her the photo, the letter, and pointed to the backpack resting on the entryway table. "I need everything you can find on Clare Carter. Who she was. Where she worked. What happened to her brother. And why this letter never reached me." Sarah scanned the items carefully, her sharp gaze focused. "Clare Carter," she murmured. "I've heard that name before." "She used to work in my building," Miles said quietly. "Cleaning staff." "You wouldn't have known," Sarah replied gently. "People like Claire, they don't show up in executive reports." She opened her laptop and started working while Miles, hands unsteady, poured 2 mugs of black coffee. But his thoughts were elsewhere. He kept returning to the way Noah had looked up at him and said, "She's in heaven." To Ethan's frail coughing, clinging tightly to a brother like he was all he had left. An hour passed in heavy silence. Then Sarah closed her laptop. "You might want to sit down." Miles didn't. He simply leaned against the wall like a man waiting to be judged. Clare Carter worked night shifts cleaning Whitaker Tower for 3 years. Sarah began. Before that, she was a full-time caregiver. Her brother, Michael Carter, died in a workplace accident 7 years ago. Miles felt his stomach drop. "That's one of mine," he said, voice barely audible. Miles muttered under his breath. Sarah gave a grim nod. "There was an investigation for negligence, but it was quietly buried. Your legal team handled it." Claire was given a small settlement under a gag order. No press, no lawsuit. He swallowed hard. And then what? She worked nights while raising her boys on her own. All 3 of them. Sarah's voice softened. She was diagnosed with breast cancer 3 years ago. Kept working until she couldn't anymore. Medical bills drained what little she had. The boys said she passed away 2 weeks ago. Miles stared blankly at the floor, feeling numb. "She tried to reach me." Sarah pulled a folder from her bag and laid it across his desk. 12 documented attempts, letters, voicemails. She even came to your office twice. Your assistant turned her away both times. Company policy. It felt like the wind had been knocked from his lungs. That policy. He remembered the memo. No personal visitors without appointments. It was meant to protect his time. But instead, it had kept him from seeing a woman who had desperately tried to keep her sons together. Sarah's voice gentled, but each word struck deep. Her last letter didn't ask for money. She only asked that her sons not be separated, that they stay together, that they have a home. Miles turned away, his fists clenched. The empire he had built with ruthless focus now felt hollow, fragile, built on silence, built on sand. Through the frosted glass of his office doors, he saw it. 3 little boys chasing Winston down the hallway, their laughter echoing. It hit him all at once. They were orphans because of him. Not through his actions, but through his absence. His inaction. His voice was barely audible. Find everything you can on Victoria Winters. And get me the real version of Michael Carter's case. The one my lawyers buried. Sarah gave one firm nod. I'll uncover the truth. And for the first time in his life, Miles Whitaker wasn't preparing to close a deal. He was preparing to make something right. Late afternoon light poured through the towering glass, windows of Whitaker Manor's grand entrance spilling golden rays across the cold marble. Miles stood at the door, his heart pounding with a strange and unfamiliar feeling. Uncertainty. Winston, his golden retriever, growled low at his side, sensing something unfamiliar beyond the door. The bell rang again. Miles tugged at the sleeves of his navy sweater, took a slow breath, and opened the door. A woman stood before him, mid-30s, striking, but radiating fury. Her dark curly hair was tied into a tight bun, her coat tailored and tense like her posture. "I'm Victoria Winters," she announced flatly. "Where are my nephews?" Before Miles could answer, she stepped forward, forcing him to back away. "You had no right to take them," she snapped, her voice cold and cutting. "I've already spoken to my lawyer. Kidnapping 3 children is still a crime, even for someone like you, Mr. Whitaker." "I didn't kidnap anyone," Miles replied, trying to keep his tone level, though his hands were clenched. "They were alone in a park at midnight. I called the police the second I found them. And yet," Victoria shot back, stepping even closer, "they're here, with you, not with family. How convenient, for a man whose company killed their father and ignored their mother's pleas for help." Her words struck like a blow. His breath caught. "How do you know that?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "Claire told me everything," she said, her voice suddenly raw. "Before she passed, she made sure someone knew how your company buried the investigation into her brother's death, how your legal team deflected her again and again, and how you, Mr. Whitaker, never even read her letters." A creak from the staircase broke the moment. Both turned to see 3 boys standing in their pajamas, halfway down the stairs, eyes wide with fear. "Aunt Victoria." Noah's voice was gentle, unsure. Her expression softened immediately. She opened her arms, instinct pulling her forward. "Boys, get your things. You're coming home with me. They can't leave yet," Miles said quickly. "Child Services hasn't approved a placement." Victoria's fury reignited. "Now you care about protocol? You had no right to bring them here." "I followed procedure," he said, pushing past the ache in his chest. "Officer Rivera documented everything." "This isn't about paperwork," she snapped. This is about what's best for them." "And you think that's you?" she added, eyes narrowing. "Some billionaire suddenly playing daddy to ease his conscience? Or is this just for headlines?" Miles took a step toward her. "Don't talk to me about guilt. I know what happened. I know what my company did. I know what I didn't do." A heavy silence fell, thick, unresolved. Then Ethan gasped, his hands pressed to his chest, knees buckling. Noah shouted, "His inhaler! It's in the backpack!" Miles darted toward the table, yanked open the zipper, and pulled the inhaler free. By the time he turned, Victoria was kneeling beside Ethan, panic frozen on her face. The boy's lips were tinged blue. "I'll drive," Miles said, scooping Ethan into his arms. "Mercy General is closest." Victoria followed without another word. The ER was a blur of movement. Nurses rushed forward as Miles burst through the sliding doors. Doctors took over, wheeling Ethan away. Miles and Victoria stood side by side in the chaos, close physically, but emotionally worlds apart. "He's been coughing for weeks," she said quietly, holding her elbow tightly. "I thought it was just a cold." "It's worse than that," Miles whispered. "Asthma, complicated by untreated bronchitis. He needs more than he's ever gotten." A doctor approached, his expression serious but not grim. "He's stable now. It was a close call. He'll need monitoring." "Can we see him?" Victoria asked at once. "In a few minutes." They waited in silence. The sterile tile beneath their feet felt colder than the winter outside. Finally, Victoria spoke. "You're paying for everything, aren't you?" Miles nodded slowly. "Why?" He didn't answer right away. Then he met her gaze. "Maybe it started as guilt, but now I just want him to be okay." Their eyes held for a quiet moment. Not rivals, not strangers, just two people bound by a child they both wanted to protect. A nurse returned. "He's awake. He's asking for both of you." Victoria stood. Miles followed. Inside the room, Ethan looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, wires and machines surrounding him. "You came?" he whispered, looking from one adult to the other. "Of course we did," Miles said, his voice cracking. "But what about your building party?" "Buildings don't matter," Miles whispered, taking his hand. "You do." Victoria gently took the other. "You matter most." Ethan blinked slowly, tears in his eyes but smiling. "Papa," he asked, looking at Miles. "Are you really my papa now?" The word struck deep. Miles couldn't speak. He looked to Victoria, waiting for her to object, but she just gave the faintest nod. "Yes," Miles finally said, his voice thick, with emotion. "If you want me to be, then yes." Ethan's smile widened. "I knew you'd stay. Real daddies always stay." Miles bowed his head, pressing his forehead to the boy's hand. He didn't care about his $1,000 coat, or that his absence at a high-stakes meeting would be tomorrow's headlines. None of it mattered. Victoria placed a gentle hand on his back. For once, they weren't fighting. They were just two people trying to do right by someone they loved. Two people who had both let Claire down, but who now refused to let her children down too. They sat there through the night, taking turns watching Ethan's chest rise and fall. Machines hummed. Nurses passed through. But Miles didn't move far. Around 3 a.m., he slumped into the vinyl chair beside the hospital bed, his head falling back, his eyes never leaving Ethan. Half asleep, half exhausted, he whispered into the silence, "I won't leave again. Not ever." In the sterile, humming quiet of the hospital room, Miles Whitaker, Billionaire CEO, and once the loneliest man in Manhattan, felt a truth settle deep within him. He wasn't just caring for 3 boys anymore. He was their father. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Whitaker Manor's East Wing, casting golden stripes along the floor. It was nearly 4 p.m., and Miles Whitaker, once notorious for never leaving the office before sundown, was pacing the hallway in a sharp navy suit, fidgeting with the time on his wristwatch. He wasn't preparing for a boardroom showdown. He wasn't gearing up for a billion-dollar negotiation. Today's urgency was for something he couldn't have imagined months earlier. Noah's regional math competition would begin in exactly 30 minutes. He glanced down at his phone where urgent emails had piled up. A glitch in the Thompson acquisition model, investor panic over stock swings, and a demanding message from a board member asking about his attendance at next week's Hong Kong conference. Miles ignored them all. Instead, he opened a text from Victoria. "We're already at the school. Save seats." Noah's nervous but trying not to show it. He smiled. That boy carried so much weight for someone only 6 years old. Or 7 now. Miles kept forgetting they'd just turned 7. He hadn't missed their birthday, though. He'd helped bake the cake himself. Liam insisted the frosting be crooked so it felt more authentic. Noah, Ethan, and Liam had become the center of his world. A shift even he hadn't seen coming. A man who once measured life by minutes lost to inefficiency now set alarms for bedtime stories and pediatric checkups. He hadn't meant to change everything. But after watching Ethan almost die in that ER and hearing Noah calmly repeat medical instructions while his hand shook, how could he go back? He stepped into the grand foyer. Winston, as loyal as ever, sat alert near the front door, tail wagging at the sight of Miles holding his car keys. "Come on, boy," he said, his voice softer than usual. "It's showtime." The auditorium buzzed with energy by the time Miles arrived. He quietly took a seat beside Victoria in the third row, just as the announcer appeared on stage. "You made it," she whispered, slightly surprised. "Of course," he said, scanning the event program. "Team Noah's up next." "Yep." She smiled. "He's been solving equations in the car all morning." From behind the curtain, Noah peeked out and spotted them. His eyes widened with a mix of nervous relief and joy. He tugged at his slightly oversized blazer and gave a single, confident nod. His unspoken way of saying he was ready. Miles felt a warmth spread through his chest. One by one, the team stepped forward to tackle complex math questions projected onto the screen. When Noah's turn came, he stood tall and didn't waver. His voice rang clear. "The answer is 192. The pattern is a Fibonacci sequence multiplied by 6. The judge lifted an eyebrow. "Correct." Applause filled the room. Victoria exhaled. Miles grinned so broadly his cheeks hurt. Back at Whitaker Manor that evening, the triplets were buzzing with post-competition excitement. Ethan, still recovering, sat on the rug drawing a picture of Noah on stage. Liam had built a tiny Lego stage and narrated the event like breaking news. "Team Noah wins the regional math challenge," he announced, holding a toy microphone. Victoria was in the kitchen, preparing homemade lasagna, the only grown-up in the house who actually enjoyed cooking. Miles leaned on the breakfast bar, skimming an email from his lawyer. The judge had approved their proposed joint custody agreement, in principle. Official confirmation was expected within days. He set his phone down and looked around. Just 6 months ago, this house had been drenched in silence. Now it echoed with laughter, Lego crashes, and clattering dishes from a kitchen finally in full use. His antique mahogany desk was no longer immaculate. Crayon drawings now shared space with quarterly reports. Even Winston had swapped his quiet corner by the fireplace for a daily parade of affection and giggles. "Mr. Whitaker," Victoria called from behind the oven mitts. "You okay?" Miles gave a slow nod. "Just thinking." "About the board?" she asked knowingly. "No," he replied, glancing at the boys. "About how this place used to feel like a museum. And now, it finally feels lived in." Victoria offered a quiet smile, a mutual understanding between two people who had once been adversaries. That night, as Miles tucked the boys into their newly decorated shared bedroom, planets glowing on the ceiling, a nightlight shaped like a rocket ship, Noah sat up and whispered, "Did I do good today?" Miles crouched beside him. "You did better than good. You were amazing." Ethan, half asleep, murmured, "Next time, I'll draw you on stage." Liam yawned, "And I'll make trophies out of Legos." Miles chuckled and kissed each forehead. "I can't wait." He turned off the light but lingered at the doorway, watching his boys, drift off to sleep. His phone buzzed on the hallway table. A missed call from a major investor, a voicemail from his CFO. He silenced it without checking. Tonight wasn't about profits. Tonight was about first-place ribbons, bedtime promises, and 3 sleepy children who believed with all their hearts that he would always be there. And for the first time in his 42 years, Miles Whitaker knew what real success felt like. He was becoming a father. And this life, was the only investment that truly mattered. The courtroom smelled faintly of wood polish and tension. Light streamed through the tall family court windows, catching dust motes that danced like anxious spirits in the still air. Miles Whitaker, 42, adjusted the cuffs of his dark gray suit, and stared forward, jaw set. A dozen reporters waited outside the building, but inside this room there were no cameras, no PR buffers, just truth, and the fate of 3 young boys hanging in the balance. Across the aisle, Victoria Winters sat composed in a navy blazer, her face unreadable. Beside her, a sharp-eyed attorney in a burgundy tie tapped away on his tablet. She didn't look at Miles. They hadn't spoken since the night Ethan nearly died. Even then, their truce was temporary, just long enough to save a child. Now, they were back on opposing sides. The boys weren't in the courtroom. Miles had insisted they stay in a private room nearby with Mrs. Peterson and Winston, their ever-watchful Labrador. They didn't need to witness more grown-ups arguing. They'd seen enough. Judge Eleanor Harmon entered briskly, her presence quiet but commanding. A woman in her 60s with silver hair and tired but perceptive eyes, she peered down over her, the glasses. "This is not a media circus," she began firmly. "This is about 3 children who have lost more than most of us will ever understand. The court expects professionalism, not theatrics." Victoria's attorney stood first, clearing his throat. "Your Honor, my client Miss Victoria Winters has a long-standing family relationship with these boys. She is their late mother's sister-in-law, has a background in education and childcare, and offers a stable and nurturing home." He cast a glance at Miles. Mr. Whitaker, however, has only known the children for a matter of weeks. His sudden involvement, though it may appear commendable, coincides a little too conveniently with recent negative press regarding his company's role in the death of their uncle, Michael Carter. The words hit Miles like a chill. He gripped the edges of the polished oak table. "Mr. Whitaker is a man with no parenting history," the lawyer continued. "As CEO of the Whitaker Corporation, his demanding schedule leaves little room for reliable caregiving. We question whether his motives are rooted in genuine care, or guilt, and reputation management." Dana Reeves, Miles's composed yet sharp attorney, rose smoothly once Victoria's team concluded. "Your Honor, let's focus on action, not speculation. Mr. Whitaker found these children sleeping alone in a freezing park. He didn't walk away. He brought them in. He called the authorities immediately and followed every legal procedure. Since then, he's ensured Ethan has received urgent medical care, enrolled all 3 boys in a top-rated local school, rearranged his work schedule, and provided steady emotional support." She stepped closer to the bench. "No, he doesn't have prior parenting experience. But love and devotion aren't listed on a resume. They're shown by who shows up every day. And Mr. Whitaker has shown up." Judge Harmon gave a slow nod, then looked directly at Victoria. "I've reviewed the case file. Ms. Winters, it says here that you visited Clare Carter, your sister-in-law, only twice during her illness, and that after her passing, you initially refused custody. Can you explain?" Victoria's jaw tensed. For the first time, emotion cracked through her calm. "I was scared," she said, voice quiet but steady. 3 traumatized 6-year-olds, alone. I didn't think I could manage it by myself. "And now?" the judge asked. She exhaled. "I still don't think I can do it alone," Victoria responded, her eyes flicking briefly toward Miles. That glance hit Miles like a skipped heartbeat in his chest. The judge turned to him. "Mr. Whitaker, why now? Why these boys?" The courtroom fell silent. Miles stood up, not looking at his attorney but meeting the judge's eyes directly. "I didn't go searching for them," he began, his voice rough but firm. "I was just walking my dog when I saw 3 kids shivering on a bench. I could have just kept going. But I didn't, because I saw something in them that felt familiar." He paused for breath. "I lost my mom when I was 8. The next morning, my relatives argued over who'd be stuck with me. I remember how it felt, to be passed around like baggage, to feel unwanted. And when I looked at those boys, I thought, maybe I could be different for them. Not perfect, Not easy. Just something real. His throat tightened. Maybe guilt was my first reason. I won't deny that. My company let their family down. But now it's because I love them. All three of them. And I'll keep showing up for them. Unless the court tells me I can't. The silence that followed wasn't just still. It was heavy. The judge tapped her pen against the bench twice. I want to speak to the children privately, she announced. Their voices matter. Miles felt his stomach clench as he watched. The bailiff led the boys from the side room, one by one, into the judge's chambers. Ethan looked pale, but gave Winston a quick smile. Noah gave a small, steady nod. Liam waved nervously before disappearing behind the door. 15 long minutes passed. Neither Miles nor Victoria spoke. When the boys came back, Liam held a drawing in his hands. A crayon sketch of a house with stick figures labeled Noah, Ethan, Liam, Aunt Victoria, and Dad. Victoria's fingers gripped the edge of the table tighter. Miles felt his throat close up. Moments later, Judge Harmon returned. Her expression was unreadable. She shuffled some papers, then looked at both adults. I'm ordering formal home studies for both households, she said, and appointing a guardian ad litem to represent the children's interest. Until further notice, joint custody will be granted. Mr. Whitaker will have primary physical custody. Ms. Winters, you will receive weekend visitation. Victoria's lips parted, a protest ready, but she stopped herself. Across the room, Miles let out a careful breath, relieved but still cautious. The judge wasn't done. Mr. Whitaker, she continued, fixing her gaze on him, this court remains concerned about your demanding career and lack of parenting experience. This is not a final ruling. We will reassess in 30 days. I suggest you both prepare. Chiffon d'eau stood, signaling the end of the session. Outside the courtroom, Victoria approached Miles for the first time since that hospital night. Her voice was low, but sharp. This isn't over, she said. They deserve better than someone buying redemption. Miles met her gaze. I'm not buying anything, he replied. I'm trying to earn it. Victoria studied him closely, searching for cracks in his words. Then, unexpectedly, she said, they'll need more than one of us. Miles nodded. Then maybe it's time we work together. For the first time, neither of them walked away. 6 weeks passed since the court gave its ruling, temporary joint custody between Miles Whitaker and Victoria Winters. To outsiders, it looked unconventional. To Noah, Ethan, and Liam, it felt confusing. On paper, the agreement was balanced. Victoria had weekends and shared medical responsibilities. Miles had physical custody during the school week. But, emotionally, the arrangement had gaps neither adult knew how to fill. The boys were still grieving, still adjusting, pulled between 2 homes and 2 sets of expectations. That evening, tension hung over the living room of Whitaker Manor like thick fog. Miles paced in front of the fireplace, his polished shoes wearing lines into the antique rug. Victoria sat on the edge of the leather couch, posture straight, arms crossed as though guarding something invisible. I don't want to fight, Miles said, voice quiet but tight. But Ethan has pulmonology appointments Tuesday and Thursday, next week. You're requesting him those days. He can't miss them. I never said he would. Victoria snapped back, her jaw firm. I'm perfectly capable of taking him. I was a school nurse for 8 years before I started teaching full-time. Pediatric asthma isn't new to me. Miles stopped mid-step, raising his eyebrows. Claire never told me that. Victoria's shoulders eased a little, her arms lowering. Claire and I had a complicated relationship, Miles, but I've loved those boys since the day they were born. I was there when they took their first breaths. She hesitated. I didn't think I could do it alone. That admission, raw and unguarded, stopped Miles in his tracks. He leaned against the fireplace mantel, staring into the fire. Why didn't you say that in court? Because admitting fear in front of a judge is like handing over a loaded weapon, she replied. But I'll say it here. I was scared. I still am. They stood in silence. Not as opponents now, but not quite partners either. Then the soft sound of footsteps interrupted them. Look what I made! Liam's excited voice rang out as he ran into the room holding a crayon drawing. He held it up proudly. 5 stick figures stood in front of a house. 3 small ones, with brown scribbled hair. 1 tall figure with a triangle tie, and another with long lashes and curly hair. Behind them was a house with a little chimney puffing smoke. That's us, Liam said, beaming. You, Aunt Victoria. Me and my brothers. That's our family. Both Miles and Victoria stared at the drawing. Not a mansion. Not Whitaker Manor. Just a house. A home. And 5 people standing together. That's beautiful, Liam. Victoria said softly, clearing her throat. Liam handed her the paper and bounced back upstairs, humming. As his steps faded, the silence returned. But this time, it wasn't tense. It was reflective. He doesn't see custody orders, Miles said quietly. He just sees people he loves. Children see things differently, Victoria agreed, smoothing the picture on her lap. To them, this isn't 2 households, it's 1 family. Just split down the middle. They need both of us. She looked up, surprised by her own words. Yes, she added slowly. They do. Miles exhaled deeply, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. Would you ever consider moving closer? To ease the back and forth? Victoria hesitated. Are you offering me money? Not money. He replied quickly. The Whitaker Foundation owns a few properties near the school. You could have 1. Rent-free, independent, yours, but it keeps you close to the boys. Victoria narrowed her eyes, cautious. But there was a flicker of something else under the suspicion. Why would you do that? Miles glanced toward the stairs. Because, Liam's right, we're all they have. For the first time since they'd met, Victoria didn't look like she was ready to fight. She looked tired, yes, but also open. Something in Miles shifted. Not broken, but thawing. Like ice softening after a long winter. He moved to the window, looking out at the backyard where Winston lounged beneath the maple tree, always keeping watch. 6 weeks ago, he never imagined this life. Coloring books on the coffee table, peanut butter smudges on the kitchen island, children's laughter bouncing off walls that once only echoed silence. Do you know what I used to think success was? He asked, voice softer now. Buildings, net worth, quarterly returns. I thought if I built something big enough, strong enough, I'd never feel the emptiness. Victoria watched him quietly. And now? He turned to face her, his eyes clearer than they'd been in years. Now I think success is making sure 3 little boys never have to feel that hollow. The fire behind them cracked gently. Neither spoke for a while. Then, Victoria finally broke the silence. I've been considering a transfer, she said it softly. A teaching position just 5 minutes away. Still waiting on confirmation, but it was a step. Something shifted in Miles's chest. Relief, gratitude, maybe even hope. I can help with that too, if you want, he offered, careful not to push. She gave a faint smile. 1 step at a time, Miles. The front door creaked open, and the sound of 3 small voices flooded the room, laughter chasing after them. Tag! You're it! Liam shouted, crashing into Noah, who let out a dramatic shriek. Victoria stood, brushing imaginary dust off her pants. Time for dinner. You're cooking, by the way, she added, throwing a smirk over her shoulder. Miles blinked. Me? Yes. Spaghetti. The boys voted. He groaned. I'm being outvoted in my own house. She glanced back at him with a grin that felt like a shared secret. Get used to it. You're part of a democracy now. As they all made their way to the kitchen, Victoria, Miles, and the boys who now called them both family, the cracks in the walls no longer felt like damage. They felt like spaces where light could enter, where healing could happen, where something new could begin. For the first time, they weren't separated by guilt or fear or legal terms. They were held together by something stronger: love. The soft spring sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the East Wing playroom at Whitaker Manor. Lego bricks, half-finished science experiments, and scattered crayon drawings covered nearly every inch of the room. Laughter echoed from the backyard, where Noah, Ethan, and Liam raced after Winston across freshly cut grass. In the hallway, Miles Whitaker, now 42, stood watching them, hands in his pockets, a quiet smile resting on his lips. It had been exactly a year since that cold November night when he'd found the boys curled up on a park bench. A year since he brought them into this house, into his world, and into his heart. The mansion, once cold and formal, now pulsed with warmth. His antique dining table bore faded cereal stains. Imported rugs were marred with juice spills. Every corner of the home now echoed with the music of childhood. But something else had also taken root inside Miles. It hadn't struck him suddenly like that moment in the ER. It wasn't loud, like Ethan's labored breathing. It had grown slowly, like the gentle unfolding of dawn, until it completely filled him. He loved Victoria Winters. It wasn't just respect or co-parenting anymore. It was love. Honest, vulnerable, all-consuming love. He hadn't planned to propose. Miles Whitaker barely planned anything beyond quarterly strategy calls anymore. But that morning, when Liam showed him the Mother's Day card he'd drawn for Victoria, crooked hearts and all, something inside Miles shifted. She's already part of this family, he realized. So why isn't it official? He looked toward the ring box resting on the kitchen island. Platinum, emerald-cut diamond, with a delicate braid of gold wrapping the band. Not extravagant by his standards, but elegant and timeless. Miles turned as Victoria entered, brushing flour from her hands. She wore an apron, curls bundled into a messy bun, and a dot of frosting clung to her cheek. They had been baking cupcakes for a school fundraiser, and to Miles, she had never looked more beautiful. "Hey," she said, rinsing her hands. "Liam still thinks his cupcakes need chili powder." Miles chuckled. "I wouldn't put it past him to sneak it in." Victoria raised a brow. "So what's with all the pacing? You look like someone about to walk into surgery." He hesitated. "I wanted to talk to you." She sat down at the island, mug in hand. Miles reached into his pocket, pulling out the small box. He didn't open it. He simply placed it between them. Victoria looked at the box, then at him. "What is that?" she asked quietly. "I think you already know," he replied, voice steady, though his heart was anything but. "I didn't plan this today. No speech, no orchestra, no announcement. Just this." He opened the box. Victoria's expression shifted. Surprise, emotion, and something deeper. She didn't speak right away. "I know this may seem sudden," Miles said, "but I've been thinking about it for a while. I'm not doing this because it looks good or because it's easier for paperwork. I'm doing it because I love you. Because after everything, the hospital nights, the pancakes, the science projects, the bedtime stories, this house only feels like home when you're in it." Victoria blinked fast, her hand brushing her chest. "Miles," he leaned closer, resting his arms on the counter. "You challenge me in ways the boardroom never did. You call me out when I need it. You love those boys like they're yours, because they are. You've helped me become someone I didn't know I could be. I don't want to keep building this life without you." His voice cracked. "Will you marry me, Victoria Winters?" She didn't answer immediately. The silence stretched and pressed against him. Then she stood, walked around the island, and picked up the box, closing it gently. "You don't know how long I've wanted to hear those words," she whispered. "But I need to be honest." Miles tensed. "When you first brought them home, I was scared. I thought you were playing the hero, that it was all image, and maybe it was at first. But over this past year, I've watched you become their father, not just by law, but with your heart, with everything you are." Her voice thickened. "But I've also seen how hard it's been for you, letting go of who you used to be." Miles reached for her hand. "I don't want to do this halfway, Victoria. Not with the boys. Not with you." Her eyes welled with tears. "Then yes. Of course yes." His relief was uncontainable. He let out a trembling laugh, pulling her into his arms, the ring box still caught between them. Just then, a crash erupted upstairs, followed by Liam's unmistakable voice. "It was an accident." Victoria laughed through her tears. "Sounds like your future stepson set off his volcano early." "He gets it from you," Miles whispered, kissing her forehead. Minutes later, all 5 of them were gathered in the playroom. Victoria showed off her ring while the boys clapped and shouted, begging to be best men. Ethan looked up at Miles, eyes wide. "Does this mean Aunt Victoria is going to be our real mom now?" Miles looked at her. She looked back at him. "I think she already is," he said quietly. Ethan beamed. "Then we're really a team. Forever," Victoria whispered, squeezing his hand. That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Noah curled up with his chess book, Liam asleep mid-sentence with a flashlight still glowing on his chest, and Ethan softly humming. They sat out on the back porch, the spring air warm and calm. "This is the best decision I've ever made," Miles said. Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder. "Even better than the Singapore acquisition." "Way better. That was about legacy. This is about love." She turned to him. "I never thought I'd be part of a family again. Not after Claire. But with you and the boys, I feel like I'm exactly where I belong." Miles looked out at the moonlit yard. The place that once felt like a fortress of solitude now radiated quiet warmth and peace. "1 year ago," he murmured, "I was just a man with a mansion. Now I'm a father, and soon, a husband." Victoria smiled. "And in 6 months, you'll probably be building a backyard observatory because Liam says his telescope isn't good enough. I wouldn't have it any other way." They sat there quietly, the trees rustling in the breeze. "I love you, Miles," she whispered. He kissed the top of her head. "I love you too. More than I ever thought I could love anything." Above them, the stars watched quietly. Inside, 3 boys slept soundly. A family rebuilt by heartbreak, stitched back together by fate, made whole by love. In the stillness of that night, a billionaire and a schoolteacher sat side by side, not bound by contracts or custody, but by something unshakable. Home. Snowflakes floated through the pale winter sky, settling gently over Oakbrook Park. The sharp winter air stung the tips of Miles Whitaker's ears, but he barely noticed. He stood still, gloved hands deep in his overcoat pockets, watching 3 boys tumble across the snow-blanketed field. Their red jackets glowed against the white canvas. Winston barked joyfully, leaping after them, his tail swinging like a clock, set to their laughter. Behind Miles stood the old park bench. Its wooden slats had recently been replaced and reinforced. A small brass plaque gleamed in the morning sun, mounted to the backrest. It read, "Where lost souls find their way home. The Whitaker Winters Family Foundation." He gently ran his fingers along the plaque, as if to make sure it was real, that this entire journey hadn't been some strange dream. Just a year ago, this very bench had been a place of survival, a desperate shelter for 3 orphaned boys trying to stay warm. Now, It stood as a quiet monument to everything that had changed. Hot chocolate. Came Victoria Winters's voice from behind him. She held a tray with 5 steaming cups, the mist curling upward into the cold air. She handed him one, her gloved fingers brushing his as she smiled. 1 year ago today, she said. Can you believe it? Miles took the cup and nodded. Sometimes it feels like it was just yesterday. Other times like they've always been part of my life. They sat side by side on the bench, the space between them filled with warmth instead of distance. Victoria wore a knitted hat pulled low over her ears, her curls peeking out from underneath. She took a sip of her cocoa and followed Miles's gaze. Noah was explaining something about snowflake patterns to Liam, who was wildly trying to build the snowman's base while Ethan shouted, "That's not a circle, it's a blob." The memory of that freezing night came back to Miles with full force, their tiny shivering bodies curled up like forgotten shadows. He remembered their wary eyes, their quiet voices. Back then, he'd been a man fueled by power and routine. His heart, like his mansion, had been locked tight. But those boys hadn't knocked. They'd slipped through the cracks, and in doing so, they'd torn down his walls without even trying. "Remember when you called me a heartless billionaire trying to clear his conscience?" Miles asked, a trace of dry humor in his voice. Victoria winced. "Not exactly my proudest moment." "You weren't entirely wrong," he admitted. "At first, I thought I could fix it all with money. Redeem the company. Redeem myself. But now, I can't imagine life without them." Victoria turned to him, her expression tender. "Nor can I. They're different now, braver, happier. But so are you." Miles let out a small laugh. "You think? You're not the man I first met at that doorstep," she said, sipping her drink. "That man wouldn't have skipped a multi-million-dollar unveiling to rush to the ER for a child. I remember every second of that," Miles said. "Mrs. Peterson called and said Ethan couldn't breathe. Everything around me, my speech, the governor, the cameras went silent. All I could think about was him." Snow began settling gently on their coats, but neither of them moved. The warmth from their drinks and the weight of their shared memories kept them anchored. "He asked me if I was really his papa," Miles whispered. "I remember." Victoria nodded. "He told me afterward that he wasn't scared anymore. Because you were there." A lump formed in Miles's throat. "I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. Until he said it." They sat in silence for a while, the boys' laughter filling the space between them. Then, Victoria pulled her phone from her bag and opened the camera. "You're going to want this," she said. Miles raised a brow. "For what?" "For the future. When they're teenagers yelling at you for not letting them borrow the car," she said with a grin, then added, "or for when you forget how far you've come from this bench." They watched as the triplets teamed up to finish a lopsided snowman. Winston circled them, tail wagging, occasionally knocking their work over to cries of protest. "Do you ever miss the old life?" Victoria asked. Miles paused. "The quiet, maybe. The control, but not the loneliness." He smiled faintly. "That house used to feel like a mausoleum." "And now?" she asked. "It's chaos," he said, chuckling. "Science projects in the hallway, drums in the bathroom, crayons on the walls, and I wouldn't trade a second of it." Victoria looked at him carefully. "They chose you, you know." Miles turned his head. "What do you mean?" "Kids don't care about status. They chose you because you showed up. You stayed. You loved them, even when you weren't sure how." Just then, the boys ran back. "Dad," Noah called, waving something in his mittened hand. "We finished it." Miles stood. The snowman was done. Misshapen, smiling crookedly, one button higher than the other. Liam had even looped Winston's leash around its neck like a scarf. Ethan beamed. "It's our first family snowman," he said. "The official one. We're doing one every year." Liam added. Even when we're old. Deal, Miles said, ruffling his hair. Can we do the surprise now? Noah asked, bouncing with excitement. Go ahead. Victoria nodded. The boys rushed over and pulled a folded paper from her bag. Miles opened it slowly. It was a handmade flyer, crayon drawings, uneven letters. It read, Coming soon, the Carter Whitaker Children's Center, a place for brothers and sisters to stay together. Below were stick figures of children holding hands in front of a building with a heart on the roof. Miles knelt, overwhelmed. You remembered, he whispered. You said no more kids should sleep on benches, Noah said. We want to help, Ethan added. I can teach math. I'll do art, Noah offered. And I'll build robots, Liam said proudly. Miles looked at Victoria, who was wiping away a tear behind her camera. This is our legacy now, he said softly. Not Reynolds Tower, not mergers. This. Family. Compassion. Purpose. As they walked back to the car, Noah held Winston's leash. Ethan hugged his sketchbook, and Liam rambled on about volcanoes. Miles paused one last time by the bench. He touched the plaque gently. Where lost souls find their way home, he murmured. Victoria joined him, watching the boys ahead. Second thoughts? She teased. Miles shook his head, eyes fixed on his sons. No. For the first time in my life, I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. They turned together, side by side, and followed the footprints toward home. We'd love to hear what you think. Drop a comment below and rate this story from 10 to 100. Tell us where you're watching from too. Make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. And if this touched your heart, check out more uplifting videos by clicking on the end.